When I turned 80, I thought I understood loneliness. I was wrong. Loneliness at 30 is a mood. At 50, it's a season. At 80, it becomes an address. You live there. You wake up there. You sit with your morning coffee there, listening to a silence so complete it has a sound of its own. My children are good people. I want you to understand that first. They did not leave out of cruelty. They have jobs, their own children, their own lives, pulling in every direction at once. I remember being that age. I remember how fast a Sunday disappears when you have obligations stacked to the ceiling. But knowing that does not make the empty chair across the table any easier to look at. So I did what most people my age do with things they cannot change. I waited. I picked up the phone and waited for it to ring. I looked at the door and waited for a knock. I got very good at waiting. I got very bad at living. Then one Tuesday afternoon I caught myself watching the clock, counting the hours until someone might call, and I thought, this is how I am spending the time I have left. That thought stopped me cold. Let me ask you something. How much of your life are you spending in a waiting room, waiting for someone to notice you, waiting for an apology that may never come, waiting for your children to finally show up the way you need them to, waiting for life to begin after this hard part is over? I spent nearly 3 years doing exactly that. 3 years in a waiting room with no receptionist and no door that ever opened. Then I did something that had nothing to do with my children at all. I went down to the basement and I found my woodworking tools. They had been sitting there untouched for 11 years, covered in dust, handles gone dry, a few blades spotted with rust. I stood there in that basement looking at them for a long time. I remembered the last thing I had built with those hands, a toy chest for my grandson. He was 4 years old then. He is 15 now and taller than his father. I carried the tools upstairs. I cleaned them. I oiled the wood. I drove to the lumber yard the next morning and bought planks, and I came home and I started building a small shelf for the kitchen. Nothing complicated, nothing impressive, just wood and time and the smell of sawdust, which I had forgotten I loved. That shelf took me 4 days. It is crooked by about half an inch on the left side. It is the best thing I have made in 11 years. Something shifted in those 4 days, not dramatically, not the way people describe transformations in books, where the light changes and the music swells. It was quieter than that. I just noticed at the end of the 4th day that I had not checked the clock once. Not once. I kept going. I signed up for a woodworking group that meets on Wednesday mornings in a workshop 2 miles from my house. 8 men, mostly my age, one younger fellow who does not talk much but works beautifully with his hands. We argue about joinery and finishing techniques and whose coffee is the worst. I have not laughed that much in 3 years. Then I got a dog. I want to tell you about the dog because the dog changed more than I expected. His name is Frank. He is a medium-sized mutt with one ear that stands up and one that does not, and he has exactly 0 interest in my emotional state unless my emotional state involves walking or food. Frank needs a walk at 7 in the morning regardless of how I feel. Frank does not care that my son is not called in 6 weeks. Frank needs to go outside, and so I go outside. And while I am outside, I see the neighbor I had not spoken to in 2 years, and we talk for 20 minutes about nothing important. And I come home feeling like a person who exists in the world rather than a person who is waiting to be remembered by it. This is what I want you to understand. I did not make these changes to send a message to my children. I was not playing a game. manufacturing distance to make them curious. I made these changes because I looked at my life and I did not like what I saw. A man sitting in a clean, quiet house, watching the clock, shrinking. I decided to stop shrinking. A few months after I started all of this, my daughter called on a random Wednesday afternoon. Not a birthday, not a holiday, just a Wednesday. She said, "Dad, I called last week and you did not pick up. What have you been doing?" And I told her. The woodworking group, Frank, the shelf with the crooked left side, the neighbor, the lumber yard. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is really good, Dad. That is really good. Not, I am coming to visit. Not, I have been worried about you. Just, that is really good." And I realized that was enough. That was its own thing. My daughter calling on a Wednesday just to find out how I was, not because she felt guilty, not because I had pressured her, but because she had heard something different in me and she was curious about it. My son called 2 weeks later. Same thing. "What have you been up to?" And I told him about Frank, and he laughed, a real laugh, not the polite kind, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, and it was the best conversation we had shared in years. But here's what I need to tell you, and I need you to hear it clearly. They still do not visit as much as I would like. I want to say that again because I think it is important. Things got better, and they also stayed incomplete. My son lives 2 hours away, and I see him maybe 4 times a year. My daughter is closer, and she comes more often now, but more often still means less than I once hoped for. There are Sundays that are still quiet. There are holidays where I set the table for one and eat well and go to bed early and feel the absence of people I love like a dull pressure in the chest. This did not get fixed. I got better at living inside it. That is a different thing entirely, and it is the only honest thing I can tell you. Because here is what I have learned at 80 years old, after burying people I loved and outliving things I thought would outlast me. Your children are not your retirement plan for happiness. They are separate human beings with their own weight to carry, their own lives pulling them forward, their own clocks running on a different rhythm than yours. Waiting for them to fill your days is not love. It is a burden you are placing on them without meaning to, and they feel it, and it makes coming home feel heavier than it should. The moment I stopped waiting, I stopped being heavy. I do not sit by the phone anymore, not because I stopped caring, but because I have a Wednesday morning to get to, and a dog who needs his walk, and a piece of oak in the basement that will not shape itself. I have a life that belongs to me, built by my own hands, and it is not the life I imagined for this age, but it is real, and it is mine, and it moves forward. If my children walk through that door, the table is set and the coffee is on. If they do not, I am going to the workshop. That door is unlocked, but I am not standing in the doorway, and neither should you. Stop waiting for your life to be returned to you by someone else. Go down to the basement, find the thing you left there 11 years ago, clean it off, start again. You still have time. Use it.